Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of how this revolution is starting to get a little bit radical, right? So we left off in class talking about how the revolution is now growing in an exponential matter of basically violence, hysteria, and confusion, honestly, which is a big thing as well. Rumors are running rampant. Crazy stuff is going on. The French are at war, y'all. They're at war in the middle of a revolution. They're fighting against the Austrians and the Prussians and some of these other coalition forces and stuff like that, which is going to lead to, one, as we already know, an increase in French nationalism, a changing of the flag, a new national anthem, all that different stuff. But it's also going to lead to the growth in kind of nervousness, right? Fear, scared, stuff like that, right? A lot of this has to do with the fact that you got to remember that they're France and they're in the middle of a revolution, right? So a war is going to cause people to look around and be like, who is our enemy? Who is our ally? Our spies here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the biggest things that you need to understand is that I believe, as a person who studies a lot of history, that this war of the First Coalition, albeit that it was successful for France, I do think is going to be the thing that kind of tips them over into the radical phase, right? Because if you look at what was going on meanwhile back at the house, right? Back at home, what's going to go down is there's going to be a lot of fear and disturbances and scared feelings in the streets, right? And one of these events that actually kind of demonstrates a lot of this fear is this thing called the attack on the Tuileries, right? The attack on the Tuileries occurred August 10th, 1792, while France was in the middle of this war, right? And in August 10th, 1792, what's going to happen is a large mob of sans-culottes members, sorry about that, by the way, it goes this one, then that one, right? A large mob of angry sans-culottes members, encouraged by the Jacobins, right? Pushed along by the Jacobins, by your Maximilien Robespierres, by your George Dantons, by your Jean-Paul Marat's, right, are going to kind of nudge them in the direction of storming the palace because you know what? You just can't trust the king and the queen anymore, right? Because you got to remember, what is the Tuileries, right? The Tuileries is the palace where the royals are under house arrest, right? And so what's going to end up going down is the sans-culottes members are going to all get together and they're going to storm into that palace, capture, abduct, and move the royal family from their posh, like nice little area where they're actually, in a giant mansion with over 100 rooms, and they're going to move them instead into a prison, right? And now this is important to understand, prisons in the 1700s, not like prisons now. Really, so like now, way worse, right? Very disgusting, very gross. They separated the entire family into different cells, and one of the most screwed up occurrences was when literally they put Marie Antoinette on the same floor as her very young son, right? It was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time. The Dauphin of France, right? The up-and-coming ruler of France. Literally separated the two of them, put them around a corner from each other. So the hallway went down, here was Marie Antoinette's cell, and then it turned a corner, and then his cell was right over here. They could only see each other if they lined up just perfectly at the edge of their cells, and they could just see little slivers of each other's face, right? And every single day, to torture Marie Antoinette, they literally would go in there, beat her son, force feed him alcohol, make fun of him, throw things at him, and basically torture him and his mother all in the process, right? Now, what you got to also understand about this event, though, the fact that the King of France, Louis XVI, is being drugged into the streets and then forced to wear a red cap of the revolution, right? You have to realize that he has no power anymore. His power is gone. It's shot. It's gone. It is nowhere, and it is going to actually lead to the destruction of the monarchy, right? Now, going into it, that you have to also understand, though, is this is just like a little fun fact. The people that were actually guarding this entire area, guarding the Tuileries itself, were actually a bunch of Swiss military officers, right? So you have to understand, since the 1500s, Switzerland has been a neutral country, right? They haven't really had a standing army since the 1500s, right? But they still had a habit of actually hiring people out as soldiers called Swiss mercenaries, right? And several Swiss mercenaries died at the attack on the Tuileries. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 80 of them. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But there's actually a monument to them about like the actual storming of the palace of like the Tuileries Palace from August 10th. There's a monument to them in Switzerland, in a place called Lucerne, Switzerland, and it's a dying lion that actually this sat above a lake, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's carved into the side of a mountain, and it kind of just shows you the interconnectedness of these European countries, right? And then also, Mark Twain visited this thing. He said it was one of the most beautiful things that he'd ever seen in his entire life. So going into it, you have to also understand what's going to happen right after that, right? So if we're now like actually abducting the king and queen, getting them, taking them hostage, and then now putting them into a prison, let's talk more about these prisons, right? So something you got to understand, though, is that this is in the middle of a pitched war, right? This is in the middle of the War of the First Coalition. Everybody is scared and freaked out. Now, the Sans-Culottes members, now that they've successfully abducted the king and queen and put them into a prison, encouraged by the Jacobins, right? The Jacobins are, of course, going to encourage them again to commit violence about a month later, right? The Jacobins are realizing that when you quench the thirst for blood and blood of the Sans-Culottes, you actually end up taking a step up in power, right? So what they're going to encourage them to do this time is they're going to be like, well, look, y'all, if the Austrians and the Prussians broke the borders of France and got inside of the country of France, got into Paris, where would they go to reinforce their army? Where would they go to find new people to help them fight the revolution? Y'all, they'd go to the prisons. And so the Sans-Culottes organized themselves into a mob yet again and went to the prisons all over Paris and started yanking people out into the streets, right? Started yanking people out into the streets, holding like really, really creepy like trials and then having people executed in the streets. And they ended up killing several hundred people during the September massacres, right? You literally have this engraving that shows they're yanking these people into the streets. And also look at some of them. Like this guy has a distinct look. What is this collar this man is wearing, right? Look at the fact that somebody has been executed over here and there's a kid holding a severed head, right? The September massacres, though, saw the death of a lot of priests, right? Most of the people that were in the prisons that actually got yanked out during the September massacres were actually priests that refused to take that CCC oath, that civil constitution of the clergy oath. They were the refractory priests that actually were yanked into the streets and actually executed. Now, remember, though, the Jacobins encouraging this is just leading to more dysfunction, right? The monarchy after this, though, is going to officially be abolished, right? And the king and queen, of course, were already arrested and they were already in jail, right? Now, things are, as you can tell, beginning to get out of hand, right? You've got people being, like, you have priests being murdered in the streets. You got the king and queen being arrested by a mob of poor people, right? Things are getting extremely intense. The monarchy is now officially abolished after the September massacres. This means that we are now moving away from the French monarchy and we're now going into what is known as an era of France known as the French First Republic, right? The French First Republic. Now, something that you got to access if you actually remember ancient Rome, right? Remember back in ancient Rome when they offered Julius Caesar a crown and he took it and he threw it to the ground? And what famous thing did he say? He said, "There are no kings of Rome," right? Like, so the only king of Rome is Jupiter himself, right? Republics don't have kings, right? Just like in Rome, republics don't have kings. So that means that if the monarchy is abolished and we're now in a republic, yo, that means Louis is just some guy. You know what I mean? Like, Louis is now just some dude that needs to stand trial for his crimes against the new republic, right? And so what's going to happen is the National Assembly, I know it says National Convention right here. They had actually just changed their name, like going into 1792, and held a new election where they actually elected new bodies of people and stuff like that. And the new body of people was called the National Convention. Don't let it confuse yourself too much. It's still the National Assembly. So the National Assembly decided to put Louis on trial for his crimes, right? And the Jacobins, at this point, outnumbered the Girondins, and they voted for his execution. And his execution was only actually voted by a couple of votes, right? It was like 37 to like 32. And then they literally ended up having Louis executed, right? And at the scaffold, they brought him up top, and he said, "I forgive those who are guilty of my sins." I want you to think about this moment for a hot second, y'all. They executed their king. They literally brought him up in front of everyone, severed his head, picked it up by its hair, and showed it to the entirety of the crowd, right? And they also did it using a fun little new toy that we'll actually talk about here in a couple of seconds, right? But Louis is now officially dead. He's executed. His head literally is severed from his body. They stuck him in a mass grave, y'all. Like a mass grave where like later on are going to dig him up and they're going to find him and they're going to like put him in this big church where the royals were buried and stuff like that. But they put him in a mass grave just like everybody else. So wait a hot second. Who's in charge now if, of course, Louis is dead? Well, that's right. It's your guys that actually were there early on, right? It's your dudes like George Danton, Jean-Paul Marat, and Maximilien Robespierre. Now, some of y'all are probably raising your hand right now, and you're like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry. I have a question, all right? So, yes, what is your question? So you have to understand, your question might be something along the lines of like, but wait, whatever happened to the Marquis de Lafayette, right? The Marquis de Lafayette saved Marie Antoinette. He was in charge of the National Guard. He was kind of ushered in as the protector of France during the early phases of the Revolution. Where did he go, and why is he allowing these three chuckleheads to be in charge of the new French revolutionary government? Well, that's a great question, y'all. But you have to understand something that happened. he actually was up at the military lines. He was actually on the border near the Austrian Netherlands, fighting against the Austrians during the war, the War of the First Coalition. So since he's out there fighting in this war, he actually is going to realize, if I go back to Paris, I'm probably going to die. Really? So like they're going to kill me. They're going to see me as an associate of the monarchy, right? They're going to see me as an associate of the royals because I saved Marie Antoinette. I kept them alive for some time. The only reason that the tricolor has white in it to represent the monarchy is because of the Marquis de Lafayette. So literally, y'all, what the Marquis de Lafayette did when he heard that like the king had died, he literally walked up to the enemy army, walked up to the Austrians and goes, I surrendered. No, so yeah, and he gave himself up. He gave himself up and was willingly arrested by the Austrians so he could actually protect himself. And he told the Austrian army, I have but one request. Let my family come and see me as often as possible, right? So his daughters, his son, and his wife actually came and saw him regularly. But if the Marquis de Lafayette is no longer there, there's other guys that you don't know about, like Mirabeau, who's now gone and dead as well. So you've got several other members that actually supported the monarchy are no longer there to actually keep things rolling. And so who actually steps into this new power vacuum is none other than this thing called the Committee of Public Safety, right? And it is not a very safe entity. The Committee of Public Safety is everything but safe, all right? So everything but safe. The Committee of Public Safety, you have to understand, is a very, very important group that is made up of mostly Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton. Now, don't let this confuse you, but Jean-Paul Marat, as a history teacher, I can't sit here and tell you that he was in that committee because that's actually not true. He was on the Committee of Treason, right? Now, some of you are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, what's the difference between the committee and the National Assembly? So y'all don't realize this because you're just like, you're young and you don't really need to. So it's never really come up to you before. But whenever you look at like our Congress, right? Like the Congress of the United States of America, like the Senate or the House of Representatives, they are made up of these things called committees, right? There are committees within all of them. There's the Committee on Homeland Security. There's the Committee on Agriculture. There's the Committee on Public Safety. No. There's no Committee on Public Safety in our government. So like there's a Committee of There's the committees on everything, right? So the Committee of Public Safety was established with a role, right, inside of the National Assembly. And they took over following the death of Louis, and they took over as basically like a de facto wartime monarchy, right? So remember, France is in the middle of a war, right? And what's going to end up happening is the Committee of Public Safety determines in the new National Convention that all enemies of the revolution must be put on trial and potentially executed for their crimes against the French government, right? And they are going to willingly use executions to scare away counter-revolutionaries, right? So something that you need to understand that is really, really big at this point. There are a lot of people in France, way outside of Paris, that think that maybe killing the king was a little bit of a brash decision, right? Like, so like that it was a little bit of an intense thing, right? And so they're actually going to kind of look at the revolution and be like, why are we doing all this, y'all? This feels like a terrible idea. And they kind of want the revolution to stop, right? They want to stop, put it in reverse, back it up a little bit.
There you go, Terry. Put it in reverse, Terry. Put it in reverse. Oh, Lord, Jesus.
Exactly. And they wanted to actually slow down, right? Well, the thing about it is, though, is the Committee of Public Safety, Maximilien Robespierre and his boy, Georges Danton, they look at this thing as where it's like, wait, you're not committed to the cause? You're not committed to the revolution? You're not committed to the new French First Republic? Well, what we're going to do? We're going to execute them, right? And so they use this method of mass executions to try and keep people from actually doing that, from breaking away and stopping the revolution. So they're going to purge and execute one group from the National Assembly that, of course, was their mortal enemy that they felt just didn't do enough, right? And it's none other than the Girondin Club, right? They actually had members of the Girondin Club mass executed as well, right? And so their new toy that they're using for these executions is known as the guillotine, right? Like they have this very new large device that was invented by a man named Louis Guillotine, and literally it bears his name, right? Guillotine was the guy's last name that actually invented it, right? Now, Louis the 16th was actually the fourth person to be executed on it, but he's going to be the fourth in a long line of people to be executed by this bad boy, right? Now, this thing is huge. It's very maniacal looking as well. You have to understand that that blade weighs like 100 pounds, right? And it's coming flying down at your neck, right? And on top of that as well, it usually like stands at about 14 feet tall. So that thing can actually pick up some speed and get hucking down there as fast as possible. Now, some of you are probably thinking to yourself as well, why is it red, right? Well, it's red to hide stains of blood that are actually going to be smeared upon the actual exterior of the device itself, right? Now, this thing is very menacing, and it does take over as the new kind of moniker or image of the revolution, but why why is the question, right? Why are they not just like hanging people? Why are they not just like chopping heads off? Why are they not just like letting them rot in prison? Well, they do that a lot. So like the thing that we need to understand though is it's brought in for two reasons, both starting with E, right? And write both of these things down. What you got to understand is the guillotine was brought in because one, it was efficient, and two, it was egalitarian, right? Now, egalitarian, egalitarian, right? Now, efficiency, let's talk about that one first. This bad boy was like the Walmart express lane of execution devices, right? You're talking about you're getting people in, you're getting people out, right? It's doing it fast and quick. Now, that already relates as well to this egalitarian component, right? Egalitarian means it's equal, right? And that it judges all people the exact same. Because what you don't realize is that before the revolution started, is that people were executed differently depending on their class, right? For example, a rich person might just be decapitated, right? Like just have their head cut off like Mary Queen of Scots, right? Even though that went terrible. Or they might be poisoned, like a la Socrates when he was forced to drink that poison hemlock, right? But what you don't understand though is poor people were typically made an example of in front of other people. They would be hung, right? Which could be taking a long time, and it actually also is a very painful way to die. Or they actually had this other method called breaking people on the wheel, where they would tie people to a wagon wheel and then make them confess their crimes as they use the back end of an axe to break their limbs and stuff like that, and then eventually using the sharp end to cut their head off, right? And they would do this in front of crowds of poor people to make sure that they weren't stealing or doing anything else and trying to basically scare them into submission, right? Well, the guillotine doesn't do that. The guillotine executes everybody quickly, efficiently, and equally, right? So and it actually gets everybody of the same class all the time. And now what we're entering into is this time period where the Committee of Public Safety is in charge. And what it's known as is,
don't you remember why I told you to stay close to me during the French Revolution?
Because after the French Revolution, it was gonna rain?
Close. I said after the French Revolution comes the Reign of Terror!
and it's going to last from 1793 to 1794. Now, a question you should be asking yourself in the back of your mind right now is why so short, Mr. Terry? Why is it only lasting from 1793 to 1794? Well, that's a really, really great question. You have to understand it's only lasting that long because it's not a very efficient way to govern over your people, executing people left and right and making all these changes to France, right? So what you need to understand of what the Reign of Terror was is it was a time period defined by a remorseless repression and bloodshed and extreme changes to France, right? When the Committee of Public Safety came in, they basically executed anybody that opposed the revolution, right? You could be actually executed for stealing a loaf of bread. You could be executed for talking badly about the revolution. You'd be executed for just about anything, right? And to keep this sense of no counter-revolutionaries in the new dawn of the French First Republic going, they also started changing all this different stuff that was actually going on in France. They renamed all the months and days of the week. Like for example, they took like the middle of June to the middle of July and they made a new month out of that, and they actually called it Thermidor because it was hot. You know what I mean? Like Thermidor, thermometer, right? Now, all months had only 30 days. They canceled Christianity, y'all. They canceled Christianity. They literally were like, Christianity is no longer real. We are now this thing called the cult of the supreme being, right? They also are going to close all churches. They drop Sundays completely. They just cancel Sundays altogether, right? Every single week had 10 days, right? And only one of those days was considered a weekend. Now, to be fair, there were no weekends at all, you know what I mean? Like in the first place before this. But every single month is now, or every single week is now going to have 10 days. So it was always going to be 3 weeks per month, right? They want to turn Notre Dame into a shopping mall. They set the price of bread, which is a very aggressive move because you're just defying a lot of economic law and theory. And they also are going to force men to be drafted into the military. Now, there's another fun one that you could actually write down on this as well, is they also enforced a dress code, right? You had to wear something red every day, right? Like during the Reign of Terror, you were forced to wear something red every single day to symbolize your devotion to the revolution. And if you were not wearing something red, you could be fined, cited, arrested, possibly even executed, right? And this is just going to actually sweep through and cause a lot of hysteria and a lot of craziness. And if you're looking at this right now, it kind of begins to describe why the Reign of Terror was unsustainable. You're talking about these three guys, Jean-Paul Marat, Maximilien Robespierre, and Georges Danton, came in during a time and changed everything about people's lives, right? Everything about the way that they function before the revolution is now gone and changed, and you're now moving into a completely new direction of French society. That's really scary to people, right? And so, of course, that's only going to be able to exist for about a year until these guys end up having something bad happen to all of them as well, right? But we'll talk about that in class, and I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.